On the path to your hoop dreams, you're going to make a lot of mistakes. And while some of those will be forgivable, some just aren't. So today I want to show you 5 of the biggest mistakes I ever made while hooping overseas so you don't have to. Let's get started. Now, the first biggest mistake you could be making is thinking that Europe is everything. Outside of the NBA, Europe is usually seen as the highest level of basketball. But where this conversation gets a bit murky is in the mid-tier and the low-tier levels, because generally speaking, the average overseas player is always going to want to land in Europe. They think, and they've been told, that their career doesn't have as much value if it's not in Europe. And that simply isn't true. If you play in other regions of the world, such as the Middle East, Asia, Latin America, Oceania, and Africa, you can absolutely make a ton of money. In fact, a lot of these regions are going to be paying more than the mid-tier and the low-tier levels of Europe. So that's where the nuance in this conversation has to be. And especially speaking to import players. If you go to some of these European countries, the competition is going to be very fierce for your spot, because the level of basketball in Europe is so high. Even at the mid-tier and low-tier levels, they have locals and nationals who are very capable. So if you are a foreigner or an import and your end-all be-all goal is to play in Europe, then you have to understand the competition is going to be very fierce and you are quite replaceable. For instance, I'll give a quick example. When I was in Latin America, I was playing in El Salvador. And at the time I was making about $3,000 to $4,000 per month. And when I crossed over to Europe, I went all the way down to 900 euros. And that was because I was a new player to the market. No one knew who I was. I had never played in Europe before. They needed to see if my game could actually translate to that market. And that was a big mistake that I think that I made, because instead of looking at Latin America and seeing where my value was, I was always constantly trying to cross over to Europe. Every summer when the season would end, I would try to message European agents. I would send them my new highlights. I would send them my new tapes, and I would say how I want to play in Europe. When you value Europe over everything else, and you disregard your playing style, your status, your nationality, passport, where you have the most connections, where you have the biggest name, when you disregard all these things and you just are completely hell-bent, you're completely focused on Europe no matter what, that's where you are almost guaranteed to be undervaluing yourself in the market, meaning you're going to be underpaid. Now, if your game suits the European game and you have a passport or you have a nationality within Europe that actually gives you an advantage, then that is obviously where you should be going, because that is where you're going to increase your market value or get the truest compensation for you as a player. But in these other instances, sometimes Europe is not the answer. There is no one right market. There's only a right market for you based on your situation and your strengths. Now, the second huge mistake you could be making is trying to sign with an agent. Now, I know this sounds counterintuitive, because logically, what you're told once you turn professionally is that you need an agent. They need to handle your contracts, how much you get paid, where you're living. But here's the thing with agents. The certification process to become an FIBA licensed agent is actually not very hard at all. Essentially, all you have to do are a few things. Study for the test, pass the test, and then pay your yearly agent fee to FIBA. Now, the problem with that is that basically anyone can become an agent, because there's no former experience needed, there's no internship needed, there's no connections to the market needed. All of these things do not matter, so long as you can complete those 3 steps. And what that means is that in overseas basketball, a lot of the market is oversaturated with agents who really have no power at all. And yes, they have the title, but that's as much power as they basically have. They have the title of being a FIBA agent, but they really can't sway or sign players in any market. So what will happen is that players, they get under the impression that, they're a FIBA certified agent, so they must have some sort of power, they must have some sort of sway, and it's beneficial to me in my career to sign with them. But a lot of times what will happen is you'll end up with basically just these ghost agents who don't really do anything. Yes, you're under them, yes, you're signed to them, but not getting any traction, you're not getting any contracts. And yes, while it is bad that you have an agent who can't really get you any deals or contracts, the more harmful thing is actually that you believe that they're gonna get you contracts and deals. So by doing that, you actually create a state of comfort and a state of lack in initiative on your own, in that you're not reaching out to teams because you think your agent will. You're not researching the market because you think your agent will. You're not actively trying to pursue contracts because you think, again, your agent is going to be able to do that for you. Now, chances are, unless you've done some serious homework on your agent, then they may not be able to fulfill or meet the expectations that you have of an agent. And I'm saying this specifically for smaller college players or mid-tier or lower level players. At those levels, the vast majority of contact information and the vast majority of teams and clubs and owners that are accessible via internet, social media, email, all these different platforms is actually pretty big. So yes, if you are a higher level player, then an agent or a strong connection is going to be needed, because essentially you can't actually even access those markets unless you have somebody who is trusted within the market. So for instance, someone like in Japan, if you wanted to play in the B League, you would essentially have to have an agent, or you would have to have someone who's well connected or has a big name in that market for you to get your chance there. There's really no other way. You can't really cold call anyone there. If you reach out to B League teams, they're not even gonna respond to you. And that happens for a lot of these high tier markets. But when it comes to these mid-tier markets and lower level markets, if you're a starter or a beginner overseas pro hooper, a lot of the contact information and a lot of the reaching out you can actually do on your own. That's why I think do it on your own to begin with, increase your market value, try to get your own opportunities. And if you sign with an agent, so be it, then you sign with an agent. But don't think that that agent is going to be able to fill all your expectations for player contracts and jobs that you want in your career. Now, the third biggest mistake made was starting too late. Now, obviously with basketball and sports in general, there was only so long that you can actually play the sport and play at a high level. Oftentimes players start later because they just lacked research and initiative beforehand to understand how overseas basketball worked, how it operated, where they were valued the most, and how they could actually be an asset to a team. And that's exactly where I fell into. When I was coming up in college and in high school, I would always say I had two basic goals. I wanted to play professionally and I wanted to play for the El Salvador national team, where my dad's from. But beyond that, I didn't really have a plan of attack. It was just always, I would say this out into the universe, and I would always hear these things about, oh, if you manifest it into the universe, then it'll happen. Or if you're good enough, they'll find you. And to me, all of this is just BS, because a goal is one thing, but there's that saying, without any plan of action, it's just a dream. It's just something that you throw out there and there's no real way for you to achieve it. And the end result of that was that I actually started playing overseas basketball very late. I started at 26 years old. The downside of that obviously was that there's only so many years that you can play in your athletic prime. But the other downside of that, there is a crazy amount of earning potential that you have in overseas basketball. Because I always think to myself, say I went through the perfect path, 4 years college, and then just went straight to playing overseas, I could have started about 4 years earlier, probably at 22 or 21 years old. That is a lot of years earning potential, 4 or 5 years of expenses being paid, of them paying for your flights, of you working online, and you also making a salary and traveling the world and being able to build your resume at the same time. That really compounds over time. But because I had no real idea, I had no plan of action, and I know a lot of players also fall into this category, I just kind of went through the motions, and then eventually it opened up to me at 26 years old. Be proactive, research early and often, and have a plan of action for how you're actually going to play overseas. Now, the fourth biggest mistake is being too transactional. The average overseas player is going to interact and message agents and coaches like this. Yo, you got connections? Can you help me out? Do you need a player? Can you sign me? And while on the surface, this may not seem like there's much harm in it, the actual problem is that when you treat everyone as a one-off transaction like that, there's really no relationship building that you're doing with coaches or with agents. It's essentially, can you help me or not? And the thing is, with overseas basketball, everybody knows everybody, which can be a good and a bad thing. On the bad side of that is if we just treat everyone as a one-off, then that's basically what it's going to be. Just, can you help me or not? Nope. And that's it. That's where it ended. The good side of that is if everyone knows everybody, and if I think and I build a long-term relationship with an agent or a coach, and I don't just use them as basically a prop for me to get to my goal, then eventually that relationship could develop into something that is bigger. Oftentimes what you'll see in professional basketball is players becoming coaches, or players becoming agents, or coaches becoming agents, or vice versa. Meaning that you never know when someone is going to end up being something else later in their career. So if you have a great relationship with a player, or you have a great relationship with a coach, and they end up actually being an owner or being a person who can make a decision later on in your career, and that's gonna work to your advantage because now they're more familiar with you. Now they know who you are, they know your personality, they know you can trust you, things they know. So when they actually get to that position of power, you're more likely to actually get hired or to get a job with that person. Because the problem with cold calling or doing these one-off transactions is that they don't know you. How can they trust you? They don't know who you are. They don't really know you other than the past 20 seconds that you just reached out to them. Now, the biggest objection to this that players often give is that they don't have connections, or how can I build connections? I don't know anyone. So here's what I often tell people. If you can add them on social media, comment on their stuff, engage with them, just have conversations. You don't have to be looking for anything. Just engage and speak with them from time to time. Another way you can do it is by actually having some sort of value that you yourself can offer. I did this myself personally. I used to be a content writer for a league called the NBLC, and this was a league based in Canada. What I had to do was I had to interview or write reports, game reports, summaries, stuff like that. And in order to do that, I needed the coach's information, I needed their email, I needed their phone numbers to call them. Big reason why I took this job was because I knew that I would get access to this information. And that was a way for me to build rapport with these coaches. And what happened was, after a while, after I built rapport with one coach in particular, they did actually offer me a position and a playing job. It worked like a charm. They got to know me, we had multiple conversations, and eventually I told them, hey, I also play and I'd be interested in playing on your team. Now, will everyone have an opportunity like that where you can write with an organization or you can work with an organization? No, probably not. But this is a way for you to just think, a framework of you to think. Can't keep treating people as one-offs. Yo, you got this, yo, you got that, yo, you got this. You want to build a long-term connection with these people. And then even think of it beyond your basketball playing career. When you get into coaching, or maybe you want to become an agent, or maybe you want to do something with your business. These are all people who are in the sports field who can also help you as well. So the fourth biggest mistake, huge mistake, is treating people too transactionally. And last but not least, the fifth biggest mistake you can make is thinking that ball is life, that basketball will pay your bills. Now, don't get me wrong. If you are in the highest levels of overseas basketball, the highest tiers, the highest leagues, then basketball will absolutely pay your bills and then some. But here's something that 99.9% of players do not know. You can still live like a king even if you're playing in the mid-tier and low-tier levels in overseas basketball. Overseas basketball is an amazing opportunity because of the perks, and not necessarily the salaries that it pays, but the perks of it. So the standard overseas basketball contract will include housing being paid for, flights being paid for, a food stipend or food entirely being paid for, utilities and Wi-Fi being paid for, and a plain salary. Alongside that, you're probably going to be required to only practice, so a work commitment of maybe 2 to 4 hours per day. You have a lot of free time to leverage as an overseas basketball player. And this is how you can actually make overseas basketball a hugely, wildly profitable endeavor for yourself. Because if you're not paying for anything, housing, flights, food, and you're getting paid a salary, unless you're tricking away all your money doing nonsense, then there's no way you can't save. There's no way you can't pay down debt. There's no way you can't build towards the life that you want as an overseas basketball player. And because of that, if you develop a second skill while you're playing overseas, then you really are going to become unstoppable in your life. Because if you combine your playing salary with not paying anything, with also a second skill or a second job, then you're just going to save and save and save and save and level up in your life. But the issue is that when people think that basketball, just basketball alone, is going to get them to where they want to be. The vast majority of overseas basketball players are going to be about in $700 to $2,500 per month. That is going to be their average income playing as an overseas basketball player. And of course, there are exceptions. At the higher levels, they're going to be making much, much more. But the average overseas player in these mid to low tier levels is going to be making $700 to $2,500. And you can imagine with the cost of inflation, with the cost of living that's happened in the world today, that's really not going to be too much to actually push you forward to your dreams, whatever those dreams are, buying a house, getting a car, whatever that is, building your own business, whatever that is. It's going to be pretty difficult if you're only making $1,000 a month. When I started at $700 a month, then it got moved up to $850, and then it got moved up to $900, all the way up to eventually it peaked at about $3,000 to $4,000, depending on bonuses. But while I was doing that, I also had a second income the whole time. So I was writing. So I would write online, I would freelance online. And at one point I was also working full-time online through writing, but I was making about 4,500 or so on my writing job. So it was a full-time writing job. Then I was also playing and I was making about 3,000 or so. And I was also coaching on the side. So that was making about $500 and there was no other expense in my life. So I was literally saving upwards of about $7,000 to $10,000 per month. But even if you're only making about $2,000 to $3,000 in your second job, and you're also playing overseas and making, let's say, $1,000 to $1,500, that is still pretty darn good. And then that can really elevate you in your life goals and what you want to achieve. This ties back to some of the earlier points. There's only so many years that you're in your athletic prime. There's only so many years that you can play overseas basketball. So you need to utilize those and maximize those years. And the way you maximize those years is actually by having a second job, a second income, and then negotiating the standard contract. Then all you have to worry about is your job and playing ball, improving each income year after year after year after year after year. But now that we have the mistakes out of the way, we can start to elevate our careers in different ways by actually being on the attack and doing it the right way. So if you're interested in doing that, click this video right here. Otherwise, I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.